All right, hi everyone, and welcome to this Google with Shopify webinar. We're really excited to have you here today. We're excited to be partnering with Shopify to bring you some content about shopping campaigns and upgrading to shopping campaigns based on all the work you've done with your feed with Shopify. So my name is Nicole Primo, and I'm the Partner Education Manager for Google Shopping. So what that means is I work with some of our strategic partners like Shopify to bring you the content you need to be super successful and to grow your business on Google Shopping or using Google Shopping. So we have a lot to cover today, but before we do that, I'll just say that we're really here to answer your questions and to talk about what you're interested in hearing about. So if you haven't noticed it yet, please do check out the event page where someone from our team has posted a link where you can submit your questions. About half of this session will be all driven by your questions, so do feel free to submit them at any time through that form, and we'll get to them at the last half of our session. But also feel free just to post them on the comments page as we have somebody monitoring that as well. And for those of you who already have submitted questions, we do have those, and thank you very much. We're excited to answer them in just a few minutes. So I think we'll just dive right into our content since we have a lot to cover today. So what we're going to start with is talking kind of about what's going on in the shopping and e-commerce ecosystem that will impact your business and how you think about advertising your products. So first and foremost, let's take a step back. So shopping used to be something different. It used to be consumers traveling to a physical store or a mall during that store's open hours, finding their product on the rack or shelf, and then purchasing it at a cash register with the assistance of a sales associate. So what we're seeing today is that this experience is really different because consumers are constantly connected. So for example, you can all probably attest to this from your own shopping experience, but consumers are shopping at all hours of the day, from everywhere and across devices like smartphones, tablets, laptops, even smart TVs. So basically, search gives us all an easy way to access information. So now, whether we're trying to get some inspiration for a friend's upcoming birthday, or we're actually researching the best make and model for a digital camera for our business, it's never been easier to grab a device and get online to start gathering the product information that will help us make a purchase decision. So because of the increased adoption of smartphones, it's generally easier for people to be more mobile in their internet access. So consumers are shopping, again, all hours of the day, whether it's on their way to class or work, during breaks, at lunch, and even right before bed or while sitting on the couch watching TV. So what they're doing is shopping has become more casual. For retailers, this is a great opportunity because it means there are more moments than ever to connect with consumers who are actively looking for your products. So with Google Shopping, retailers have the opportunity to connect with consumers and display products that are relevant to their search in that particular moment. So with product listing ads, or PLAs, you can showcase your entire product inventory and include important information that consumers care about right up front, like a brand, a price, an image. So in other words, we know that you guys have a lot on your plate as retailers, so PLAs take a lot of the guesswork out of targeting your products to the right search queries based on your actual product information, and this makes sure that the right potential customers are the ones that are connecting to your inventory. So here's an example of somebody who's found really good success with Shopify and Google Shopping. So Pup Life, has said things like, Google is the perfect place for us to advertise because dog lovers use it to find our products. They've also said that they've tried everything and that Google simply worked really well for them. It allowed them, in fact, to achieve a 35% higher conversion rate than the average on their site, which is pretty phenomenal results. Of course, the summary here is that Google has helped PubLife grow over the years, and they rely on Google product listing ads as well as text ads to bring new customers and help customers return to their business. So here's what you need to know about shopping campaigns, which hopefully you've maybe heard mention of but before this hangout. But essentially, shopping campaigns offer retailers 3 key benefits. So first and foremost, they offer a retail-centric way to manage your product listing ads. So you can browse the data feed that you've created directly in AdWords and select the products that you'd like to bid on as a group. You also don't have to worry about kind of strategically organizing your products in the same way, in the sense that there's no overlap possible. You start from taking 100% of your inventory and grouping it into strategic segments that allow you to bid, for instance, on all of your flip-flops, all of your dress shoes, and all of your high heels differently according to those different products' values. Next, shopping campaigns offer some advanced reporting options that allow you to understand how you can get more out of your shopping campaign. So no matter how you organize and bid on your products, you can review your product's performance at any attribute level that's targetable. So for instance, you can drill down into performance reports to understand which brands are performing the best, maybe which product types, or even which individual ID level products are really your best sellers. Of course, with that kind of information, you're able to then strategically manage your bids according to brand or according to ID so that you can get more out of your advertising. Okay, and last but not least, competitive landscape data. So we've heard time and again that retailers need to understand how they're performing against their peers who are selling similar products. So this is exactly what competitive landscape data allows you to do. You can see important key metrics like impression share. So of all the possible times people were searching for your product, how often did it show? You can also see benchmark data, like benchmark max cost per click. So for instance, if you're bidding way lower than all of your competitors, you know there might be room to grow. One last competitive benchmark that I think is a really good one is benchmark CTR, so benchmark click-through rate. What this means is that you can compare and see if, for instance, your click-through rate is significantly lower than your competitors, you know maybe it's time to spruce up your images or compare your pricing strategy because other people are capturing more clicks than you are on the same kind of impression. So now that hopefully you're excited about, thinking about shopping campaigns, let's talk through how you would actually go about creating one. So the good news for you guys is it's actually quite easy. It's literally a 3-step process once your data feed is created. So first you'll create a campaign. Next, you'll choose your settings, like your budget. And finally, you'll start grouping those products to bid on them differently. So you can see here that creating a campaign is really simple. Once you've established an AdWords account, you click the New Campaign button, and there's actually a shopping subtype that will walk you through the process. From here, you'll get a screen that will prompt you to choose your settings. So this is where you'll set, for instance, your daily budget, how much you're willing to pay or spend on a daily basis, as well as your default bid, so what do you actually want to bid on all of your inventory. And this is also where you'll be able to verify that your AdWords account is linked to the appropriate Merchant Center account where you have your data feeds. So that's it. Once you follow those 2 pretty painless steps, you'll have a shopping campaign with what we call an all products group. That all products group means that whatever you specified as the default bid is now your bid for 100% of the products in your inventory. So you can see in this example, this retailer specified 40 cents as their default bid in that settings page that we saw one slide back, and now they have a default bid of 40 cents for all of the products that they've submitted in their data feed. So like we've talked about and like I mentioned earlier, it's great to get all of your inventory online, but you probably want to be a little bit more strategic than that. For instance, your flip-flops probably are not the same kind of value to your business as your dress shoes. So that's why you need to subdivide into product groups, which we'll get into in more detail right here. So product groups are essentially your way of saying these products deserve a similar bid. So for instance, what you'll want to do is think about which are the products that have different margins or different sale rates, for instance, some of that are best sellers, and how do you want to group them according to their value. So you can see this kind of very simple, basic pie chart here. This would be like a superstore or some kind of department store that sells a bunch of product categories. Obviously, they're going to want to have a different bidding strategy for their apparel versus their electronics versus their furniture, and that's exactly what product groups allow them to do. So let's walk through an example of what this looks like in practice and how you'll actually be subdividing your product groups. So just to recap where we left off, we have a shopping campaign with an all products group with a bid of 40 cents on our entire inventory. To start that product group subdivision process, simply click the plus button and you'll see this pop-out window that lists all of your inventory in your feed. So from here, you can use the drop-down menu to choose which attribute you'd like to start subdividing by. So you can see here that you have 6 basic options. You can start subdividing by Google product category. You can start subdividing by different brands. Item ID, if you have individual items in mind that you'd like to bid on. Condition, so this is mostly used by electronics resellers who have, used and new and refurbished. Product type, which is your own taxonomy for describing and categorizing your product, and then custom labels 0 through 4, which we'll talk about later, but basically allow you to identify custom tagging options. So once you've chosen which attribute you'd like to start subdividing by, in this case category, you'll be able to start adding which of that attribute value you'd like to subdivide by. So an important note here is that, for instance, in category, you might have hundreds of categories in your feed, but only 50 or so that you really want to manage the bids for. That's perfectly okay. You can choose as many or as few attributes to subdivide by based on what's appropriate for your resources, how much time you have to actually manage this campaign, but also what's most important to your business. Okay, so you can see that throughout this process, this is my favorite retailer, Acme Bikes. They've chosen to break out their bikes, their clothing, and their parts, and then they have other product categories, but they've left them in everything else. So you can see what's happened now is they're able to bid on their bikes, on their clothing, on their parts, and then everything that they haven't broken out simply falls into that catch-all of everything else in all products targets. So this would originally have had that bid of 40 cents, but they decided after thinking about it that that is actually going to be a 65-cent bid because it represents the rest of their inventory. So The other thing is, of course, bikes is a huge category. You might have several different types of bikes with different margins. So you're able to repeat this process of subdividing up to 7 times. So the first level being the first, then an additional 6 times. So let's take a look at what that might look like. Again, it just starts with pressing the plus button to begin breaking out more specific groups. So let's say they've gone through that process, choosing their attribute and then adding what they want to subdivide by. Here's what the result of their campaign looks like. So they've broken out their bikes into more specific options, like by men's and women's, and then different types like cruisers, road, triathlon bikes, and they've actually been able to differentiate bids for each of these segments according to how valuable that segment is to the business. So again, this is just one example, of course. You can do this a number of different ways. The key here is understanding that product groups allow you to group items that you want to bid similarly on. Okay, so now that we know the mechanics, let's actually talk a little bit about planning your strategy. So the first tip to upgrading your regular PLA campaign to a shopping campaign, or even creating a new shopping campaign from scratch, is actually starting by thinking about your bidding strategy. So once you develop a bidding strategy and understand your needs for your campaign, you can basically work backwards and plan how you'll subdivide your inventory based on your desired level of granularity and bidding strategy. So many advertisers we find fall into one of the 3 buckets you see here. So starting from the left, there are those who organize their inventory and bids by product lines and brands. Basically, they want to be able to bid by margins. For instance, again, going back to that example, the difference between flip-flops and dress shoes. Next, there are some of you who want to segment your inventory according to its performance. So this would be, you might bid according to margins to some extent, but you're really focused on return on ad spend. So really focusing on your best sellers versus your low sellers versus maybe high inventory and flash sales. So much more oriented around performance. Last but certainly not least on the right, there are many of you, and I would even say probably the majority in my experience, who do some combination of both. You might start by breaking out to associate your bids based on margin values, but then as you get deeper into the tree, within those margins, you might specify higher bids for the best-selling items and lower bids for those that don't sell as well. So let's walk through each of these in a little bit more detail now that you've seen kind of the big picture of options. So if you're one of these people who thinks about inventory in terms of brands and product lines, here's an example of what your shopping campaign might look like. So you can create product groups and organize your inventory just like you would in your store or through your catalog, where basically each product group represents a different product line. So for instance, in this example, you could start with apparel and then go more granular into women's versus men's apparel, and then even from there break out specific brands that have different margins. So if your product group template, if you're thinking that this might fit your needs, we recommend that you seriously consider revisiting attributes like product type, Google product category, and brand, since you'll rely very heavily on those in this type of setup. Okay, so if you're more along the lines of thinking of your inventory in terms of performance, let's look at this example, which you might use as a basic template. So you can choose to break out individual best-selling items at an ID level, or you can group your high-margin products differently from your low-margin products. So for instance, you could start by breaking out just a collection of best-selling items and then subdivide by margin, and then finally break out even maybe individual IDs that perform especially well. So to follow this strategy, we strongly recommend that you rely on custom labels and IDs, both of which we'll talk about a little bit more later, but just make the note here that custom labels will be key for this type of strategy. Okay, and the last example, and again, the most common, most likely, is the hybrid of needs, where you're concerned both about segmenting by product line, but also by performance. So, whatever the case, you'll likely use a combination of attributes that we mentioned earlier, which includes, again, product type, Google product category, brand, custom labels, condition, and ID. So in this example, you might consider something like a back-to-school campaign. You'd start by using a custom label to tag all of the items relevant to a back-to-school campaign. Then you would subdivide by product line, so apparel versus school supplies, and then maybe you might get deeper into individual items or individual brands. So it's an important thing to note that you really do have a lot of ways that you can set up your campaigns, and I recommend using one of these 3 templates just to get you started. Again, it's just about how you'll be able to group your products to fit your business strategy and product needs. So now that you have an idea of how bidding strategy fits into your campaign structure, let's jump into feeds. So you guys know that data feed quality has always been important in terms of making sure that you're matching your products to the right customers. It's always been important as well to ensure that you have high quality images and titles that customers actually want to use and click on. Now in shopping campaigns, it's arguably more important than ever in some ways in terms of actually enabling you to organize your campaign in a way that makes sense for your business. So let's talk about the key factors that you should be looking at in your data feed. So here are the 6 attributes that I mentioned earlier that you can actually create product groups by. So we're going to get into a couple of key ones that more people than not use, but if any of these seems applicable to your business, I would recommend just working with Shopify or working with your team internally to make sure that you're submitting the best information possible across these 6 attributes. I know some of you are probably thinking, that's all fine and good, but I have hundreds of thousands of items or even tens of thousands of items. There's no way that I can go across all of the items and revisit each of these 6 things. That's a great point, and I'll just start by saying if you're feeling overwhelmed or if you're feeling like this isn't doable for your inventory, I strongly recommend starting by mapping out how you'll want to create your product groups. So simply put, think about your major product segments, and then that's where you know you need to focus in your feed. So for instance, like that bike example that we used earlier, Acme Bikes really knows that professional bikes, cruisers, parts, and clothing are their key inventory that drives the majority of their revenue. Therefore, they've mapped this out, and this is how they're going to want to organize their campaign, so they understand that that's what they should be revisiting first in their data feed. Okay, so we mentioned product type a couple of times. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, product type is essentially an attribute you can use to categorize your own products according to whatever classification system makes sense for you. So many of you probably already have some kind of taxonomy or cataloging system that you use on your website or in your database. This is a great place to start or even replicate for your product type. However, you may also want to consider other factors or variables in your inventory that you want to be able to categorize your products by. So you can see an example here, again using Acme Bikes as a guinea pig. They really want to include gender, for instance, because men's bikes, let's say, sell more often than women's. Year, you can see why that might be useful for them to include in their product type, because last year's models are discounted, whereas this year's are not. And even something like size. So if there are common sizes that are most common to sell out, they may want to be able to pull those off the shelf, essentially, when those are sold out, or be able to promote them more heavily because they know that they're most often the best fit. So long story short, the goal here is just to use your existing classification system as a springboard, but then also consider what additional variables you might want to build into your system so that you can bid according to those variables. For those of you who don't have your own product type or product categorization system, we do have the option, and you're more than welcome to use Google Product Category. So essentially, this is also a categorization system called a taxonomy, but it's standardized across retailers and helps Google understand more about your products. So in that sense, it's not going to be as tailored to your specific needs and the specific variables you're interested in categorizing by, but if you're starting from scratch, this might be a short-term solution or something you use as a template to build out a more robust version on your own. So here's another one that I mentioned a couple of times. It's custom label. So custom label is a way that you can tag products to be able to group them when they don't share other targetable attributes. So for instance, I think a very common example is like a sale. You might have a clearance sale on bikes and helmets and clothes and parts. Obviously, those various items won't share a brand or a product type, so by having that ability to tag each of your sale items with sale, you're then able to target those as a group. So you can imagine there are lots of different ways to do this according to your own key performance indicators, but some common examples we've seen are in this table. So what we recommend you do is, since you have only 5 labels, start by mapping out pretty basic definitions. For instance, custom label 0 might be where you include which season the product is relevant to, and then you know that it will either be spring, summer, or fall, winter. Additionally, something like selling rate, you can see here in custom label 2, bestseller or low seller are the only 2 possible options, and they're basically mutually exclusive. So once you've kind of mapped out how you'll define and what values you'll use for each of your 5 custom labels, you'll actually need to add them to your feed. So an important note here is that you'll notice if, for instance, you want to be able to group by bestseller, all of the bestseller labels need to fall into custom label 2. So, or custom label 1, or custom label 0. Basically, you couldn't have some custom label 1s with bestseller and some custom label 2 with bestseller, because we wouldn't be able to map that you mean the same thing. So that's why we strongly recommend you first define what each label will be used for, so then it's very easy to translate that into beautiful symmetrical rows where each is mapped accordingly. So one additional note here is that when you do make feed changes, you'll need to upload them or re-upload your feed so that those changes take effect. But also, if you're currently using shopping campaigns and you have what are called AdWords labels or AdWords groupings, don't worry about deleting those. Leave them in your feed. They won't hurt anything. Simply add custom labels as the new option. Okay, so that brings us to kind of a quick recap where I'll go over your main action items and what you need to do, and then, of course, feel free to start entering those questions, and we'll spend the rest of our time there. Okay, so 3 basic steps. Number 1, create a shopping campaign. It's super simple, as you saw. It's something you could do in the 5 minutes after this hangout. You know, click that new campaign button, choose shopping as the subtype, click your settings, so budget and bids, and then you have that all products target. From there, you'll need to go to step 2, which is planning your more comprehensive bidding strategy. So this is where you'll step back, think about how you want to segment and organize your product groups, and then go back to your campaign and start implementing by subdividing. Last but certainly not least, you'll also want to revisit your data feed so that you can make sure that your product groups are ideally aligned to meet your business goals. So think about things like product type and custom label and how they allow you to organize your campaign in a more strategic way that meets your business needs. The good news is as well, you have a lot of resources at your disposal to both learn more about shopping campaigns, but also get your questions answered should any of them come up outside of our Q&A session today. So with things like the Merchant Center Help Center, which is a searchable database, Google Shopping app on Shopify, there's a lot that can help you execute and manage your campaigns in a way that'll be beneficial and profitable to your business. So with that, I'll just say a quick word of thanks. I know you guys are busy, so even carving out a half hour I know can be a challenge. So thank you for doing it and spending it with us on the Google and the Shopify teams. So I'm going to take a minute and look at the questions that we have submitted, and we'll start answering those in about 60 seconds or so, but feel free to continue submitting questions if you do have them. Okay, so we have some great questions starting to come in. So a great question from Anjali is, what is the right point in your business's growth to start using Google Shopping? For a new company with limited inventory, could there be problems with doing this too early? So it's a great question, and I think that the answer is really, there's no point at which it's too early to start using Google Shopping. If you have inventory that you sell online and you have customers that you know are looking for your products, it's great to start that shopping campaign. You can keep it simple, but by doing so, you're allowing your customers to connect with your products. So in terms of potential complications, if you only have, let's say, a handful of items for now, or they're very niche kind of specialized items, the only potential complication I see is that you may not get a ton of traffic. But again, it's not really a problem, and it's certainly not something you're penalized for on Google's end of things. Whether you sell one product or several million, there's no difference to us. It's just about how high quality your data is and how you've organized your campaign to bid on those items. So I would say the sooner the better, specifically if you've already taken the step of setting up a feed and doing all of the work that's required on the end with Shopify. Set up a campaign, get it going, because you'll also learn a lot as you kind of grow, and you'll be set up when you're bigger to know what you're doing with a smaller set of products. So a question from Philippe, how will you handle Google Shopping in Germany? Feel free to chat back in if there are more specific questions that you have about this, but generally the way that we work internationally and globally is that each country has a different set of feed requirements, in the sense that in Germany they need to be in German, they need to have German currency, so each country is tailored to that country's specifics in terms of language and currency. In terms of how you set up your campaigns, it's the same idea. It's the same kind of process and steps, just with slightly different targeting in terms of you'll probably target Germany as opposed to the US, and you'll use that German feed. So I'd recommend looking in the Merchant Center Help Center, where you can get a full list of details in terms of which countries have which language and currency requirements. And again, if there was a part of that question that you were looking for a more specific answer, feel free to chat back in and I can take a second stab at it. Okay, so a question from Matthew. So Matthew says, my products are custom made along the lines of items in Etsy, and he frequently gets an error that G10 is missing. So he's just wondering what this means and how to correct the issue. So it's a really good question because it points to a key piece of your Google Shopping data feeds, which is called unique product identifiers. So unique product identifiers, or UPIs for short, are basically those universal codes that identify an individual item. So these would be something like G10s, which can be universal product codes, UPCs, or manufacturer part numbers, MPNs, or for books like the ISBNs. All of those uniquely registered numbers are what we call unique product identifiers. So for products that don't have these, typically those handmade custom goods, you can simply submit an attribute that's called identifier exists. So if your product does not have a unique product identifier, submit the attribute identifier exists with the value false. Essentially what you're telling Google there is these products don't have unique product identifiers, don't look for them. So when we know not to look for them, we then know it's not an error that you don't have them, whereas if you don't tell us not to look for them, we don't necessarily know that they shouldn't have them. So hopefully that clarifies the question. Long story short, you should be submitting unique product identifiers unless you have custom-made good, in which case submit identifier exists and use the value false. There's a question about if shopping can be used for adult products. So to be perfectly upfront, I'm not a specialist in terms of the ins and outs of adult products. I know that there are certain categories that are restricted and others that you are able to show for. So what I'd recommend doing is go into the Merchant Center Help Center and simply type like adult policy into that search bar, and you should get the policy specifications so you know which products are allowed and which are not, and what you need to do to make sure that you're promoting sensitive products according to policy and guidelines. So again, I would look up the specifics on the policy website, which is again Merchant Center Help Center, and simply doing a search for adult policy. Okay, Alan has a great question about variants. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with variants, basically it's the same product that comes in several different sizes or different colors, for instance like a t-shirt or a piece of furniture that might be manufactured in a couple of different options. So his question is along the lines of what data is outputted by Shopify to feed a PLA and how are variants handled? So in that case, I definitely think that we should connect you with more of the Shopify team, and maybe we can post a response on the event page, because I'm not so familiar with the Shopify side of things, but variants are absolutely handled by Google Shopping. So you can do what are called group item IDs. So for instance, the same t-shirt can be in the same group item ID, whether it's black, white, red, yellow, etc. So that's a great way of understanding and being able to report on your products in a way that it's at the group level so that you can understand how variants are reporting. And to get to this last part of your question, which is about how titles are handled, again, that would be something that from the technical side we can talk to Shopify about, but with Google Shopping you definitely have those options. Okay, so I only have like 3 more questions, so if anyone else has any others, make sure you do start submitting them. Okay, Scott has an interesting question about kind of pricing and sale pricing. So Scott's question is, I use voucher codes to drive sales to the website. When I list the products on Google Shopping, will I be able to manipulate the sale price displayed to include the discount with the voucher code? So generally speaking, if the price is what's reflected on your web page, then that's the price you can use on Google Shopping. So if you have a sale that's kind of standard for everyone gets it, you can absolutely include the sale price in your feed, which is what will show up on Google Shopping and Google search results. If it's something where I actually have to enter a voucher or a promotional code in the checkout cart in order to get the sale price, that's probably not reflected on your website landing page, in which case we would need you to submit the full price of the item, because that's what's going to be what matches your landing page. So kind of long story short, sale prices are absolutely you can use sale prices in your feed and in your Google Shopping ads. However, they have to be sale prices that are automatically take effect and are reflected on your landing page. So this is another, Tom has a question about kind of how the feeds are set up with Google Shopping. So as I mentioned in the answer to Alan's question, we can definitely post more information on the comments in the events page after the event, because I'm not so familiar with that, but generally speaking, the question is, what has happened in the past year that would make the process easier for me? So from Google Shopping side of things, I can tell you right away that shopping campaigns are what we've done to make the process easier on retailers. So with regular PLA campaigns, if any of you are familiar with those, the process could be kind of cumbersome. In the process, you didn't get a lot of insight into what was actually happening to your campaigns once they were set up. So what we've done is we've kind of talked to a lot of retailers of all sizes and understood what they needed and built a solution from the ground up, which is now shopping campaigns. So I would encourage you, if you've taken a stab at regular PLAs in the past and they haven't worked or they felt overwhelming, certainly try a new shopping campaign, because it's a very different, much more intuitive, streamlined experience, and one I think that anybody of any size can definitely have success with. Okay, so last question from Rolata. How can I get more traffic to my website? So generally speaking, I think that Google Shopping is a great way to get highly qualified shoppers who are in market to your website and browsing your products, right? So they've literally told us that they're looking for instance, sneakers or dress shoes or whatever it is, and they've chosen to click on an item that appeals to them by the image that's displayed, the title, and the price. So with that kind of traffic, you know that somebody has, one, looked for your product, and two, actually selected to choose your product based on some basic information. So Google Shopping is a great way to get more traffic to your site, and of course, once they're on there, it's up to you to create a beautiful, easy checkout experience that encourages them to quickly add that product to their cart and then fulfill their purchase based on their searching. All right. Well, thank you so much for the questions. These were some great questions, guys. And again, thank you for taking the time out of your day. So we really appreciate it. Certainly, there will be a recording of this Hangout, including the Q&A session, on the event page. So feel free to share it with any of your friends who are also retailers or anybody in your team that you think would benefit from it. And thanks again.